A lot of times, before we actually get started with callers, somebody has something they want to talk about, and that's today.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right.
All right.
Holding up. And you wanted to talk about brain dead.
Yeah, brain dead is dead.
It is.
Really.
Okay.
So there's
First caller? Oh, that wasn't it. There's more to brain dead is dead. Let's get to it.
You know, the cameras are like really close today. I feel like I can just like reach out there and touch the audience.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. So
Put some clothes on.
yeah. Anyway, so there's a couple of cases in the news right now where people are letting wishful thinking and grief interfere with decision making. There's one case involving a young girl out in California. This young girl went in for surgery to correct a sleep apnea problem that was causing, I guess, her to stop breathing during the night. And so she had surgery to correct this, and I guess it involved removing her tonsils and maybe some other surgery. And she started hemorrhaging shortly after the surgery. The doctors couldn't stop the hemorrhaging. Ultimately, her heart failed, and at some point she was declared brain dead. So not just that her heart stopped and they couldn't get it resuscitated, because they actually did get it resuscitated, but unfortunately she had suffered other medical events and she was brain dead. So the doctors explained this to her parents, who refused to accept it. And they went to court to stop the hospital from removing this girl from a ventilator that was artificially keeping her heart and lungs and her body functioning. And since then, they've been to court a couple of times. The hospital refused to insert a feeding tube and a breathing tube because there is no ethical duty to treat the dead. And once you're brain dead, game over. You're dead. And so, and to be clear, she was not in a persistent vegetative state. She was not in a coma. There was like nothing, no electrical activity in her brain other than just random neurons firing here and there. So the hospital's saying, hey, she's dead, and they were trying to help the parents come to terms with this, and they refused to come to terms with this. So since then, this girl has been, she was released to the coroner because she had been declared dead. So they released her to the coroner, who then released her body to her parents, who had her transported to what I've heard was a Catholic care facility, where she has now undergone surgery to have a feeding tube and a breathing tube inserted to maintain her body. So this religious organization is now maintaining this dead girl on life support, I guess for as long as her body will continue on this life support. So that's the first case. The second case involves a woman in Texas who suffered, as I understand it, a pulmonary embolism, which resulted in her being deprived, her brain being deprived of oxygen for over an hour. So she got to the hospital. They did test. She's brain dead. Unfortunately for her, she was also 14 weeks pregnant when this happened. And there's a law in Texas that says you can't remove a pregnant woman from life support. The hospital and I guess the authorities that are involved in this case have interpreted that to mean that a brain dead woman who is pregnant must be maintained on life support until the fetus is determined to be viable or it dies. So this woman's body is being used as an incubator for a fetus, even though her husband has said, look, she didn't want this. She was clear about this. She and her husband were both paramedics. They knew what being maintained on life support entailed, and she did not want this. So in spite of her wishes, she is basically having her body used as an incubator. Now, this could be termed as, like an abortion argument. But before you go there, keep in mind that if this brain dead woman, had not been pregnant, and she had died in the hospital, if there had been a child in the room next to her who needed her heart to survive, they could not have taken this woman's heart from her without her consent. unless she consented to be an organ donor. They could not have gone in there and taken her heart, even to save the life of a living child in the room next door or anywhere else.
So I guess one thing worth pointing out is that because in both of these cases the individual is dead, in neither case are we actually doing harm to them.
Right.
This has more to do with the people surrounding that individual
Exactly,
and how they're prolonging this, but also in the second case where this woman's wishes were not respected, it sets a precedent where the rest of us have less and less security that our wishes will actually be respected.
Right.
You know, I would like you to chop my body up and use it for scientific experiments and give parts to whoever needs it and whatever else. And that's what I'd like to do. Unfortunately, when you're dead, you're dead. And so when I'm dead, I'll no longer have any say over what happens. And so the only thing that I can do right now is take comfort in the likelihood that my wishes will be carried out. And the more cases that we have like this, where people's wishes are being disregarded, the less comfort any of us have that it's likely to happen.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but there's great harm being done to the relatives of both of these people. In the case of the pregnant woman, you know, her husband, and they have a young child also, but you know, her husband and the rest of her extended family, they can't even, you know, bury her or cremate her, whatever they would do. In this case, they're forced to drag out this process. They know she's not coming back. There's very little likelihood that the fetus is unharmed by this event because, you know, she suffered a pulmonary embolism. It deprived her brain of oxygen for over an hour. It's pretty likely that that had an effect on the fetus as well. They won't know for several more weeks. This has been going on for over a month. They still have over a month before they're going to do the test to determine if the fetus is even viable. So they're dragging this out. This is torturing this family. And then if they do end up, if the fetus does survive a very premature birth and, you know, after its mother's pulmonary embolism, if it's you know, brain damaged or whatever, who's going to pay the medical bills for this very, you know, handicapped child? I doubt the state of Texas, which is forcing this family into this situation, is going to pick up the tab indefinitely for this child. So, you know, I'm.
Yeah, in the first case, let's say there were independently wealthy parents who were spending all their own money to keep the remaining sack of meat, you know, alive, heart pumping, et cetera, for indefinitely.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that would like to just say, hey, it's their money.
Yeah.
And they're not doing any more harm to their daughter. Unfortunately, we can't always look at things in those terms. We have to look at the broader effects on what kind of society do we want to have. Do we want to have this ghoulish society where there's a likelihood that resources, even your own resources, are going to be diverted to a pointless effort that is a denial of the reality of life and death? Or would we rather educate people about how to deal better and cope better with grief and the fact that, you know, death is the, so far, unavoidable conclusion?
Right.
It's tragic that they lost their daughter at any age. I mean, a parent losing a child is just terrible, but they're convinced they haven't lost her yet.
Right, and that's the case. That's especially the case for the young girl in California, because her mother refuses to accept the fact that her daughter is gone. She keeps, you know, saying, "No, I know she's in there," and
that's really weird because, as I was saying to Jen before the show, if you're somebody who believes in a soul and that the soul is part of the body, aren't you just trapping her soul in the body? I mean, aren't you just torturing a soul by leaving it trapped? I mean, it's like you've come up with a new way of being the Ghostbusters, and instead of crossing the streams and putting a box, you're just using your daughter's body to trap this soul. Let it go. I mean, isn't that the preferable thing for this?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. And if you don't believe in a soul, what are you hanging on to? You know, you're not going to lose any more memories. It just, a lot of it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. Which is, we got an email in the last week where an atheist, a recent atheist, was asking, "Hey, you know, what about end of life thing? I'm trying to decide this," and he was asking, you know, "What do you think?" And so I said, "Hey, you know, personally, I intend to donate all of my usable organs so that they can make someone else's life better, and then whatever's left can be cremated." You know,
Make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
But, you know, and it's one of those things where I don't know the religion of the parents. I mean, obviously, if they put her at a Catholic facility, you know, it's probably something along those lines. But not only this notion of potentially trapping a soul, but you know, when I was a believer, you're going to eventually be resurrected to heaven with a new body and everything else.
Right.
And what happens to this body doesn't matter any more than really what happens in this life. And so none of this makes sense from a purely theological perspective. And to me, it is really more about people's inability to deal with grief and loss, and religion informing their views in ways that are just completely counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a case where religion clearly isn't helping people deal with grief and loss.
You want to
Let's go to calls.
jump to calls?